We're talking today with Bill Crow of Wichita, Kansas, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, Bill, start us off with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
October 4th, 1927 in Butte, Montana.
All right, and did you grow up there?
No, we were there for about 2 years, and then we moved to Oklahoma first, and then to Kansas.
Okay, and what kinds of things did your family do for a living when you were a kid?
I'm sorry,
What kind of job did your father have, or?
well, my father was the reason we moved because he worked for Safeway, and they sent him to Oklahoma to work in a store, and then brought him up to Wichita to manage a new store that was at Main and Murdoch,
Okay,
and he was the manager of that new store.
all right. Now this is the 1930s in the era
Yeah,
of the
right.
Depression,
Yes.
but was he still earning a reasonable living then for?
Well, and he bought half share in a small grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
It's a half a block from Safeway. And then eventually he bought the meat department too. He bought that from a German couple who had a small grocery store there for years. Then he did that for a while, and of course I was the kid that got to change the sawdust in the meat department, and oil the floors, and put the cans on the stuff, and so on.
Okay, how many kids were in your family?
My younger brother and myself. My
Okay.
younger brother was 8 years younger than me.
Oh, so you got to do all the work.
Yes.
All right. Now, and then how far did you go in school?
I went about 2 weeks in the 10th grade, and that's when I decided that I ought to go in the Marine Corps.
All right. Now, before that, do you remember how you heard about Pearl Harbor?
That was on the radio.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And when you first heard the news, did you understand what that meant?
Not really. Not really. But other than the fact that it was war.
Mm-hmm. Now, before that, had you been paying any attention to the news in the world, the war in Europe, that kind of thing?
Well, you see moving pictures and things like that, which gives you rather a warped sense of what goes on. But,
So you had like newsreels at the movie theater, that kind of thing?
yes, right, newsreels and newspapers and so forth.
Okay. So you had some awareness of it. Okay. Now, you were still pretty young when the war started. You were
Yes.
14. Now, what made you decide to enlist when you did?
Well, I had a lot of wanderlust when I was a kid. I'd run off from home about 3 times, and the last time I run off, I hitchhiked a ride with the sheriff in Colorado. Who immediately took us to jail and called my father, and we come back home, and my father was a great man. I had all the admiration in the world for him. He could talk to me and get more out of me. My mother would just hit me with whatever was handy, so which I deserved, I know.
All right. Now you're 16 years old.
I'm sorry.
Now, when you were 16, that's when you actually enlisted.
Right.
Now, legally, you couldn't enlist until you were 17.
That's right.
So how did you get into the Marine Corps?
I lied about my age, and I changed the date on a birth certificate that I had so that I was 17.
Okay. Now, at that point, I mean, did your father sign for you?
Yes, he did.
Okay. So he was willing to send you on.
Well, his last comment that I remember was he says, "At least I'll know where you're at," which within 6 months' time, he had no idea where I was at.
All right. So roughly when was it? What time of year did you enlist? I think it was late in 43?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it would be late in 43. I don't remember just what date.
Okay. Now, what did they, so where did you actually sign up? Where did you enlist?
Here in Wichita.
Okay, Wichita, okay. And then once you signed up, what did they do with you?
They sent me to Kansas City to take a physical,
Okay.
and we went up there on the train and come back on the train, and waited to be called, and they called us very shortly.
Mm-hmm.
And they put me on a train and sent me to San Diego.
All right. Do you remember anything about that train ride?
Oh yes, it was 3 days long, and I never did get a seat. It was mostly stand-up time.
Okay. Did they feed you?
Beg your pardon?
Did they have food for you? Was there a dining car? Or...
Yeah, they had a dining car, but I don't remember much about the food.
Okay. Now, when you were traveling on the train, let's see, did they have, do you remember if they had a steam engine, you know, like an old coal burning engine, or a diesel, or?
I'm sure they were burning coal.
Okay. All right. Did you get to get off the train at all, or were you just stuck on it?
No.
Okay. Now they get you to San Diego.
Right.
What kind of reception do you get at the training center?
We get a drill sergeant that's standing there waiting for the train to come in, and after everybody got loaded out, why, they lined everybody up, and everybody that's going to the Marine Corps, follow me. And we did.
Mm-hmm. Now, was he yelling at you yet?
I'm sorry?
Did he yell at you, or was it just matter of fact?
Well, they were very abrupt about everything.
Okay. All right.
They began to educate us real quick.
Okay. So what did the basic training consist of?
We went to boot camp for 7
Yeah.
weeks. First 3 weeks was drill, 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 drill. The next 3 weeks were bang, bang, bang on the rifle range for 3 weeks. Then 1 week back, we were supposed to do slop shoot duty, but we didn't have to do that.
Slop shoot duty?
Yeah, well, work in the galley.
Okay, so KP,
Yeah.
whatever, yeah.
And,
All right.
Then they assigned us to our training.
Okay. And then what kind of training did you get?
Well, I was promoted immediately to a PFC, and I remained that for the rest of the war.
Mm-hmm.
But I was sent to Camp Pendleton, where we did combat training. We did a little bit of everything, and then they sent me to, we had combat training and bayonet training and grenade throwing and so forth, and running and jumping and obstacle courses and so on.
Okay. Did they
And
have?
we finished that up, and we were sent to school.
Now, while you were there, you were doing the training at Camp Pendleton. Did you
Yes.
have field exercises where you'd be out overnight or anything like that?
Yeah, it was a little bit of everything.
Okay.
So,
All right. But then you get a more specialized school now.
yeah.
So what was that?
Well, then when I went to school, they sent me to a communications school,
Okay.
and what was it today?
Did
Well,
you?
we worked on semaphore, we worked on all kinds of communications,
Okay.
had a smattering of information on encoding.
So did you learn Morse code? Did you have to learn?
No, I did not.
Good.
We had, well, that's later on.
Okay.
But,
All right. Okay. But so were you learning how to operate a radio or or a telephone?
no, just basically messages and how to handle them and
Okay.
things like that.
All right. And do you have any idea why they picked you for that?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Other than I was just a dumb kid.
All right. Now, how easy or hard was it for you to adjust to life in the Marines? I mean, you've been kind of independent.
I had no problem with it because I wanted to be there.
Okay.
There were those that weren't particularly happy about being there, which made it more difficult. But I was fortunate enough to have some good drill instructors in boot camp,
Okay.
and they were not the mercenaries that occasionally some of the guys had, because I can recall seeing a DI being chased across the lot at the end of a bayonet from bayonet practice, because the guy was mad at him and he was going to get him. But there were some DIs that, and our DIs were very strict, but as long as you did what you were told to do, then you didn't have any trouble. But you didn't question anything, because they would march you off into the ocean. They would, tell you to get down in that mud and take you through a mess of dirt and sand and so on, and then give you about 15 minutes to get everything cleaned up. And if you didn't get them clean, well, I can remember one time we had our dungarees, and we'd had so many minutes to get those clean. We had scrub brushes and a scrub board, and then after you got them all cleaned up, why, you would stand out and hold them out on our arms like this, and the DIs would come along and inspect the clothes to see if they were clean. And if anybody's weren't clean, then he would just say, drop your arms. And the clothes would go on the ground, and he would march us back and forth across the clothes a few times, and he said, all right, now you got 10 minutes to get them clean. It was, that type of, it was not mean, but it was meaningful, because it was really training us to the point where we would act without thinking.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, do you know if your drill instructors were combat veterans? Had they been to Guadalcanal or anything?
Yes, one of them had. The other two, I don't remember for sure. But the sergeant had, and he was good. He was a good man. He was just doing his job, is what he was doing.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, as you're going through these different stages of training, are they teaching you anything about the Japanese or what you might encounter when you go out there, or is this just all learn the procedures, follow the orders?
Well, I think everybody was still thinking that all the Japanese were little bitty short guys wearing the thick glasses,
Mm-hmm.
and which I found out later was not true.
Yeah.
Because the first unit we run into on Peleliu was Japanese Royal Marines. And I think the first dead one I saw looked like he was about 7 foot tall.
All right. Okay. So, do you have an idea of when did you finish that training? Somewhere in '44, I guess.
Yeah, we took the combat training, and then our specialist training, and then they formed our company up.
Okay.
Which was the JASCO company.
Okay. Explain what a JASCO company is.
We were a company that joint assault company that went in with the assault troops. We had, and eventually we got Navy radiomen in with us, plus our own radiomen, and we had the Navy men were there primarily to call in naval gunfire. There was an air unit that was in that would call in airstrikes, and that was the job of our unit, was to do those kind of things, and in conjunction with the assault troops.
Okay. Now, were you attached to a larger unit? So what division?
Yeah, we were attached to, that is, I was attached to the 1st Battalion, 3rd Regiment, with the 1st Division.
Okay, so 1st Marine Division.
Right.
All right.
And that was, then they split us up among the whole regiment, and our teams went with different units. So
you're probably 3rd Battalion, 1st Regiment? Okay, right, not the other way around. All right. Okay, so now, did you get to train with them, or do you join them someplace, or?
Well, we joined them down on the rest base, which was on Pavuvu.
Okay.
In the Russell Islands.
All right. Now, did you form up the company back at San Diego or Pendleton?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now, once you formed up the company, now what happens to you?
Well, then, our next operation was, we just went overseas.
Okay.
They,
what kind of ship were you on?
we were on a Dutch ship that had a Dutch crew, had an American gun crew. It was an old ship named Peleliu. The captain on that ship was a Dutchman, and I can still hear him. He said, "Garbage detail, dope to garbage." And that where we started our float across the sea.
Okay. Now, was it just your company that was on this boat, or were there other Marines?
No, we had, it was our unit, which was 600, a little over 600 men.
All right. Now, was this
total.
Okay.
And we stopped in Hawaii for one day, and they picked up a bunch of Japanese troops. Where what they were doing there, I have no idea. But anyway, they joined us on the ship.
So, Japanese Americans?
Japanese.
Well, Japanese, like from Java.
From Java.
Okay.
And to this day, I don't know. I assume they were there being trained for something or another. But then we began our trip across the ocean. And 30 days later, we stopped first at Tulagi and Guadalcanal. And if I remember right, I think they unloaded the Japanese troops at Tulagi.
Yeah.
And then from Guadalcanal, we went over to our rest base, which is about another 50 miles on Pavuvu.
Okay.
Which was a coconut grove.
All right. Now, did your ship sail in a convoy?
No, we were just a sole ship.
Just by yourself? Because normally...
30 days.
Okay. Did you do a lot of zigzagging while you were sailing? Did you change course a lot? Or not that you noticed?
Not that I know of, but it's very possible they did.
All right.
It took long enough.
Yeah. Now, were you worried about Japanese submarines or aircraft?
I didn't particularly think about them, no.
Okay. All right. So you get to Pavuvu, you're in the Solomon Islands, and now does the rest of the division...
That's where the 1st Division was at.
Okay, so the division's already there, so now, is this when they kind of split you up and they assign you to the different battalions?
Right.
Okay. All right. And then, were there particular people that you worked with, that you remember? Other individuals?
Well, our commanding officer of our regiment was Chesty Puller, who was a legend in the Marine Corps.
Okay. What impression did you have of him at the time?
Oh, well, complete awe. He was definitely for his men. For instance, we had some natives come over from another island, and they built some grass huts for us for mess halls. And officers and men were all eating in the same mess hall. And we had a new second lieutenant that had come in, and he walked up and went up to the head of the line to get in. But he didn't notice that the colonel was back here in line waiting his turn.
Mm-hmm.
And Chesty went up and grabbed him, and I don't think that second lieutenant ever stepped in another line as long as he was in the Marine Corps. But that's the way Chesty was. He was for his men. Granted, our regiment took a lot of casualties, and a lot of people blamed him for it, but he was there with you.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't just sending you.
Okay. All right. About how long do you think you stayed on Pavuvu?
On Pavuvu, we were there, oh my, I suppose we were there maybe 3 or 4 months.
Okay, so quite a while.
And we did night training, we did make work.
Did you practice any landings? Did you use the landing
Yeah,
craft?
we did go back over to Guadalcanal and did some assault landings, practice landings on the canal.
Okay.
And that was when, after that, we took off for Peleliu.
All right. Now, what was your actual job when they were making a landing? What would you do?
I was a runner. My favorite expression was when I took a message to the colonel one time, and when I was still 16 years old and very impressed by this legend of a Marine, he said, I don't know what we'd do without you runners. He said, I can't depend on these radios or telephones. Well, he could have told me to go right straight to the gates of hell, and I'd have went.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the kind of a officer he was.
Right. Okay.
But that was my job as a runner to, if the communications broke down, then my job was to get the message there by foot.
Okay.
And they would say, this needs to go to so-and-so and so-and-so. Well, where are they? They're over there. You know, here's a telephone line. You can follow that telephone line. That'll go to them. Well, you follow that line about so far, and it had been blown in two or run over by a tank or something else. And, you know, well, okay, so then you just have to wander around until you find where you were going.
All right.
But you deliver the message and you come back and
Okay. When you were in the Solomon Islands there before you went to Peleliu, did they do anything to prevent you from getting malaria?
we took Atabrine tablets,
Okay.
which turned you yellow.
All right.
Turned your eyes yellow, turned your skin yellow. It was that's the first thing that really shocked me when I got there, was to see all of these yellow guys. But that was basically to try and protect you from.
Okay. Now, were there guys who tried to avoid taking it? Were there people who didn't want to take it?
We didn't have a choice.
Okay.
Yeah, but we'd go through a chow line. At the end was a corpsman who was standing there, and he had a bottle of Atabrine tablets, and he says, open your mouth, and he throws it in your mouth, and you take a sip of something and swallow it down.
Right. Okay, well, did it work? I mean, did you get malaria?
I had malaria, not real bad, but No, it wouldn't keep you from malaria, but it would help if you did get it.
Okay. Yeah, because it was supposed to keep you from getting it.
Well, it was a terrible tasting thing.
Yeah.
If you ever tried to chew one, you would never forget it.
All right. But they're getting you ready now for your operation. Now, when you joined the unit, were there a lot of men who were experienced soldiers? People who'd fought in Guadalcanal or Bougainville or someplace like that?
Well, yeah, our division, we had a lot of troops that had been on Guadalcanal. We had troops that had been in
Cape Gloucester was another place they went.
Camp Gloucester, New Guinea.
Okay. All right.
And of course, they had been in Australia then for a short while,
Right.
just before I joined them.
Yeah. Well, that was just to recover and get a little time off. Okay. So now you go to Peleliu. Can you just the island is in the Palau archipelago? Did they tell you why you were going there?
Oh yes.
What was the purpose?
Yeah, the general got on the speakerphone and gave us quite a lecture that within 3 days we would have this island and the air base on it in order to have better connections with getting aircraft to and from Japan, and a place for aircraft that had been to Japan and had problems and needed to could land because there was an airstrip on Peleliu.
Okay. I think it was kind of between Indonesia, near closer to the Philippines.
It was, 10 square miles.
Mm-hmm. All right. And what do you remember about the invasion, the landing?
We went in Amtrak.
And what's that?
Okay, which is, some people called them alligators.
Mm-hmm.
Had tracks that they run on, and they went in the water.
Okay.
But the bulk of the thing sit about that high out of the water. And we'd all gone down rope ladders and dropped into these. No, I'm sorry, we didn't that time. That time we went down. We were on an LST.
Mm-hmm.
We went down on where the Amtraks were at and
Right.
loaded into the Amtraks. And I happened to get a position where I was straddling the drive shaft that went through it and looking out the back of the Amtrak. And that was the only place I had. And that's where I rode into in the second wave.
Okay. Now, was there a bombardment ahead of time or anything like that?
Oh yes, yeah, they had shelled it for days and days and days, and you'd think there can't be anything left. Well, they didn't touch it. It was, we had very little bit of the beach the first day at all.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember going in, and as we went in, why, you could begin to hear the fire coming, and they had a point out off the north end of Peleliu. There was a little point that set out there, and that's where the Japanese had some anti-boat guns dug in, machine guns covering them, and so forth. That was our biggest problem there. But as we came in, they were trying to hit the Amtraks that were coming in. And I forget how many waves of Amtraks there were, but from after the Amtraks, then they came in ducks, which was a different type of
sort of amphibious truck instead of an amphibious track vehicle.
Yeah. And but as we went up over the reef, that Amtrak went up to just like this, and you almost felt like you were going to tip over backwards, you know. But by the same token, looking out the rear, I was seeing these shells, and I saw what happened to some of the Amtraks. They were hit before they were got ashore, which was our air unit was just wiped out in one of those. So we had no people that dealt with air strikes left. But anyway, we pulled in up onto the beach, and then those old Amtraks, you had to jump over the side. There was no ramp on it.
Okay.
And so I went over on this side, there was a shell hit over on this side, and then all the guy that was driving the Amtrak said, "Get out of here, get out of here, get out of here, I gotta go back and get more people." So it went over, and
So now you're on.
basically just started ducking because it was nothing but fire coming.
All right. Did you try to get off the beach, or you just stay where you were?
Well, first thing you did was dig a hole to try and get some cover, because we were getting a lot of fire on the beach. They shot a lot of people on the beach.
Okay. Now, was there opposition directly in front of you, so you couldn't go forward?
They had troops in front of us, but the big item was this peninsula that
Right.
stuck out here,
Right.
and that was immediately on our left flank, and they could just rake the whole beach.
Okay. Now, was the
From
Navy?
there.
Yeah. Were the Navy ships trying to shoot back at that?
I'm sorry.
Was anyone shooting back at the Japanese?
Oh, well, yeah, if you could see them, but, you know, spotting them, and, but then you get a lot of fire going that, you don't know, you can't spot a target every time. You don't know what you're shooting at.
All right. Now, was the island, was it a volcanic island or
It
fossilized
was, yeah,
coral?
and it had, all the reef and everything was just terribly sharp, and they had owned that island for 30-some years, and I think they must have been digging on it the whole time, because they had places that were 3 stories deep down into those, and they had railroad tracks run down inside that they could run artillery up. They had doors that would, big steel doors that would fold shut, that if you could call naval gunfire in, you had to get it while it was open,
Right.
in order to do any good.
All right.
It was, the first day there was pretty rough.
Okay. Now, did anyone order you to do anything that first day, or did you just stay put?
Well, we didn't have much choice. You couldn't get up and go. The airstrip was relatively close to where we landed, and that, of course, was our first objective. But we couldn't approach that first day at all.
Okay. Now, what happened that first night? Once it gets dark.
I had a hole dug, and there was some activity during the night, but it was difficult to tell what was going on, really. And until daylight, well, then you find out what was going on, and it was pretty wild. We had one man in our unit that went berserk and started just firing at everything and everybody. Threw a smoke grenade or a phosphorus grenade into a foxhole close to him that was his best buddy, and that phosphorus grenade went off and burned him real bad. And I can still remember those corpsmen hollering up and down the beach trying to find, I forget the stuff that they had that would stop that phosphorus from just completely burning through you, you know.
Right.
But I don't remember the name of it, but I remember them, you know, passing that word up and down to the,
Sure.
nobody had any. But my sergeant wound up killing the guy that was doing all of this, which
Yeah.
that's, you know, that's kind of a new experience for a 16-year-old.
Certainly. Okay. Now, how long were you stuck on the beach?
Well, the second day I was up and running messages.
So were they pushing forward into the airfield by then, or?
We took the airfield, I think it was the third day,
Okay.
and but we were still getting on fire on it, you know, that was because the island was so small, but no matter where you were subject. But
So when you're carrying messages, I mean, what do you do to avoid being hit?
you run fast and offer up a little prayer and so forth. But basically, you know, I spent most of my time just trying to follow a telephone line or trying to find where I was going to deliver whatever I was supposed to deliver to whomever it was. And it was quite an education. So I got to go a lot of different directions. But it was.
And did you carry?
I was still pretty ignorant of the fact, but I did make a couple of trips down through to the point. And when I got down there, we had one company down there that was literally just wiped out. And I couldn't get over all of the dead Marines that were laying right there on the beach.
Because that campaign, that lasted a number of weeks. I mean, it was
Oh
not-
yes, that went on for a long time. As a matter of fact, after the war ended, there were, I think it was 30 or 40 Japanese troops who finally surrendered years after the war was over. They had lived that continuous time down in those caves and stuff that they had dug. And they had films of them, you know, when they come in to surrender. And of course, that we were long gone.
Now, did you carry a weapon?
Oh yes, an M1.
So you just had a rifle like anybody
Yeah.
else. Did you ever use it?
Yes, and whether I ever hit anybody or not is a good question. You know, and, if you think you see something and you think that then you can shoot at it, but you very seldom do you really know, because basically they were dug in, and it was they had control areas where they had dug into the ground too, and I remember one time when I went down to the point that they had found this opening to an underground, apparently a pretty good sized opening down under there, and but they were trying to get everybody to quiet down because they had heard some noise down in there, and they were calling down in there to make sure that it wasn't some of our troops that were down in there, and there was no answer. So they finally just began throwing some grenades down, but I stopped and watched that for a while. I thought, well, okay. And it was, you know, I had a job to do, and I had to go on my way. But it was a real learning experience for a 16-year-old kid.
All right.
I actually turned 17 aboard ship, leaving Peleliu.
Okay. Now, when you were on the island while the battle was going on and so forth, Did you have a regular place that you would sleep, or were you just always moving around?
Generally, I was on the beach,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where I got most of my orders from and so forth, but then I was from one end to the other and all around.
Okay. Now, had they dug in some kind of headquarters that
Oh
was
yeah,
safer?
they had a concrete block building on the airport that was, I don't think they ever knocked that building clear out. And that was, they had worked on that island for the whole time they
So
owned
you
it.
you took over some of the Japanese facilities then?
I'm
So
sorry?
your headquarters, your people kind of took over some of the Japanese facilities that they captured?
No, never really used them,
Okay.
no, we were just out in the open most of the time.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, did you ever see any Japanese aircraft there?
Yes, well, not on Peleliu.
Okay.
On Okinawa, a lot of them. Yeah,
Yeah, I can
because
play.
that's where the kamikazes
Kamikaze,
started
yeah,
coming
okay.
in.
But at Peleliu, they're not bothering you
Yeah,
particularly? Okay.
that was basically our aircraft that was,
All right.
and naval gunfire.
Now, do you remember any Army troops landing on
They
Peleliu?
came in to relieve us
Mm-hmm.
because they pulled our regiment out after 10 days because we were done.
Yeah.
There just wasn't enough of us left to be effective.
Mm-hmm.
And they pulled us around on Purple Beach, and eventually they just took us back down to our rest base.
All right. And how much of the regiment was left at that point?
I'm sorry?
How much of the regiment was still there?
Well, they took our first regiment,
Yeah.
is the first ones
Right.
they took out. You know.
But what kind of losses had you taken?
Some companies were just practically gone.
Mm-hmm.
And like the Company K that was down on that point, I think there were 8 men left out of that company.
All right. So did you go back to Pavuvu?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, and of course, they had a hospital ship offside.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't get anybody out there until, I don't know, the 3rd or 4th day before they could really get
Right.
many of the wounded out, because I know when we first got on the island, I had come up to they had a big tank trench that was dug all along there, down deep, and I thought that looks like pretty good cover, so I jumped down in there, and I look over here, and I think there was 4 of those guys that were our Navy radio men. And I thought, well, what are they doing over here? Well, and then I realized they'd all been tagged. They were all wounded
Mm-hmm.
and had them tagged for waiting until they could get them out to the hospital ships. It took a little bit to register on me what the deal was.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a pretty tough deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Now, once you're back on Pavuvu, do they start bringing in replacements and rebuilding the regiment?
Well, yeah, when we got back down to Pavuvu, we started getting some of our wounded back from that. They had a naval base over, I can't remember the name of the island, but they had a naval hospital over there,
Mhm.
and that's where they took a lot of our wounded. And little by little, why some of the wounded guys would come back into the company.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
And did
And
they
I
say?
had one good friend that had been hit in the right rear end. And when he came back from the hospital, why, he didn't have any right rear end, and he was on crutches. And they thought that he would recover, but they finally took him back to the hospital. I never saw him again, so I don't know just what happened from him. But,
Yeah. How long did you stay there? Did you stay there until you went to Okinawa? Or?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's a long
yeah,
time.
we stayed there until we got ready to go to the Okinawa.
Okay. Now, at what point did you get new guys coming in?
Well, our regiment was out of there in 10 days.
No, I mean when you're on Pavuvu
Oh.
and they have to rebuild the regiment. Did you get
Oh.
new men coming in?
The 81st, let's see, yeah, 81st Army unit relieved us.
Yeah.
Because I can remember somebody, as we were going in or out, they were going in. One guy said, "What outfit is this?" He said, "It's the 81st Wildcat Division." He says, "You might be Wildcats now, but you'll be tame pussycats before long."
All right.
Well,
Okay. I guess I was asking about your first Marine regiment. You take a lot of casualties.
I'm sorry?
Well, you took a lot of, but your unit, your regiment took a lot of casualties.
Oh, yeah.
You go back, but then did they send you a bunch of new recruits
Oh, yeah.
to replace
yeah,
the old ones?
We refitted. Of course, a lot of people lost a lot of gear and so forth, so they had to resupply us with a lot of things.
Okay. Now, did you get to know the new guys? Did you start working with the new ones?
Oh yeah. They would come in, and of course we were all living in tents there, and just fill in the vacant spots.
Okay. So it sounds like you spend the better part of 6 months or something close to that on Pavuvu.
Yeah,
Rebuilding.
Yeah, that was our
So-
rest base.
Yeah. So what was a typical day like while you were there? What did you do?
Make work. So you'd see one team coming down digging a ditch, another team coming down and filling in the ditch. Another crew went over and were digging in this coral pit, digging up coral, loading it in trucks and bringing it up to our living area and filling in the swamp so that we weren't living in a swamp. But that was a 24-hour day job. They would just, you would work a shift and then go back and work another shift, and that, and all doing night azimuth trips, where you take your compass and shoot at azimuth at night and go out into the jungle, and you go so far, so long, so far, and eventually you're supposed to come back out where you went in. But oftentimes it was daylight before some of them come back, and it was so dark that we got to picking up pieces of rotten wood that would fluorescent, and a stick of that in the back of your belt so you could follow the guy ahead of you. And I could remember following one of those fluorescents, and all of a sudden you had stepped off in a big hole. It was almost a joke, you know.
Okay, yeah. Did they do anything to provide you with entertainment? Were there movies or
They
anything?
had a movie set up and a bunch of coconut logs laid out where we could sit on the coconut logs and watch the movies. And of course that was a big deal, you know, that we watched those movies. And at one time then is the one time that I saw Bob Hope and part of his company. They had been over on Guadalcanal, and they heard that the 1st Division was on Peleliu. And they didn't bring their whole crew over there, but they did bring a few of them over there. And so we saw that show. And he had, I can't remember this comedian who was with him, had a big mustache. Can't remember his name now, but yeah, and he had, I don't know, 3 or 4 dancers, you know, and so he come over and put on a big show for us. We weren't on his schedule, but when he found out we were over there, he come over, and they had to come over in Piper Cubs, because that's the only strip we had was a Piper Cub strip. so
Okay.
they couldn't bring a whole bunch of people over there.
All right. Now, did you get to go off the island at all, or were you just
No,
stuck there the whole
no.
time?
Well, we went swimming,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
go out and look for shells and things like that.
But you didn't get a leave or a furlough
Oh
or
no,
anything?
I
Anything like that?
never had to leave the whole time I was in the Marine Corps. I had a 2-day pass just before I went overseas, World War II, and my mother and my little brother come out to visit me, and I got a 2-day pass to have with them.
Okay.
That was the only leave I ever had out
All right.
of the Marine Corps.
Okay.
They paid me for it all, and but
Okay. So you're on Pavuvu for a long time. You have this routine you're doing. Did you think maybe the war was going to end before you got back into it?
no.
Okay.
Uh,
I guess they were still expecting to go to
because
Japan.
we were getting ready for the big show up at Okinawa.
Right. Okay. At Okinawa. So when the time comes then to go to Okinawa, now what happens?
Excuse me,
Okay.
I'm gonna have to change the battery on my hearing aid.
All right. You can go ahead
Is
and
that
do that.
all right?
Yeah.
I'm just going. Thank you.
So we're talking here about getting ready now to go to Okinawa.
Right.
All right. So what do you remember about that voyage?
That we were on a troop ship for 30 days. Building the convoy up and getting everybody together. We got off of the ship on an island that they had fixed up for just that purpose, to let troops get off, and they served some beer, they served some drinks, they had basketball courts, a few things set up like that. I can't remember the name of that island, but we were there one day.
Okay.
And we got off the ship, but the rest of the time, I think we were on there, on that troop ship, about 30 days.
Mm-hmm.
It was a long time.
Okay. Now, during that time, could you be on deck a lot of the time, or did you have to be?
We could get up on deck as long as there wasn't any kind of an alert or anything going on. But it was just, we just played a lot of pinochle.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of poker games going on.
All right. And then once you actually start to go into Okinawa, what do you remember about that? The fleet, bombardment, whatever?
Well, I can remember the night before, and I was very apprehensive all night long because I could see another deal just like Peleliu, and yet when it come our time to go in, we were in a free wave that time for some reason, and yeah, we went in again on Amtrak's. But I know at the control boat, our CO was on that control boat, and we were in what they call a free wave, and they said, we'll send you in whenever. They said, as soon as we got there, they said, go on in. Oh, crap, We walked ashore and never fired a shot.
Now, do you remember the bombardment before the?
Oh yes,
Okay, what was that?
they air bombs and naval gunfire. You'd think they were sinking the whole place, but they weren't there.
Okay. Now,
They had evacuated all their troops
right.
to the other end of the island where they were going to make their defense. That the one time that they did not defend the beach, and we were all just stunned, but that's great, to just walk ashore.
Now, at that time, when you're making the landing, did any Japanese aircraft show up, or did they come later?
No, they came right away.
Okay.
Yeah, because I can remember them, because all the ships were just firing like crazy. And I think they probably shot down almost as many of our planes as they did of others, because there was a Zero that came down along the beach, and behind him was, I think it was a Corsair.
Quite possibly, or Corsair or Hellcat, yeah.
But anyway, one of ours was shot down from all of this anti-aircraft coming off all these ships out in the bay. The Japanese, that one got away. But many of them, well, toward the end of Okinawa, when they were sending in just planes and planes and planes, they had moved us up to the other end of the island, and we had a radio set up that was air warning net, and they would call in, let's say, flight number so-and-so, so many bogeys, so far from Bolo Point. And then they come on pretty soon and say, splash 10 bogeys from flight number so-and-so, so far from Bolo Point. And then eventually what few planes would get through would come in, and you'd see them go out and try to get those ships. And that's one time I felt sorry for those guys, because you can't dig a foxhole on steel decks.
Right. Okay. So to go back to you, so you've seen the spectacular bombardment, the air battles, all the stuff is going on, but you just go on shore and there's nobody shooting at you.
Yeah.
Okay. What did you do then once you landed?
Went inland.
Mm-hmm.
We went into, first place we went into was an airstrip. And, well, and then we stayed, part of us went back and stayed along the beach there for quite some time.
Okay.
And then our regiment went on up, and they literally took one end of the island with practically no opposition to mount anything. But there were so many natives on there, and they had, the Japanese had used that for a dumping place for their insane, for their people with mumu, which was elephantiasis, that kind of, and the other disease.
Leprosy?
Yeah, leprosy. Sorry. Let me get that. That's probably.
So we got into the point in your story now where you're on Okinawa, they've kind of cleared off most of the island, there's fighting going on one end of the island. You had spent a lot of time still near the beach. Now, would you go back and forth across the island to deliver messages, or just stay on the beach?
Yeah, I did a lot of that.
Okay.
But then they moved us to the other end of the island where we set up this air control. But anyway, that was right toward the end of the war.
Okay. Yeah. And so at that point, so you're not really close to the heavy fighting that went on. That was the other end of the island.
We weren't then at all. Yeah.
Okay. So you're manning this.
We were for a while, but not long.
Okay. And you were talking a little bit about the civilian population was still on Okinawa, and it included people with physical illnesses, mental illness, and so forth. Now, did those people come around where you were?
Oh yes, yeah, they were around, and a lot later they did gather them all up. But at one time, when we were up there, we had 4 little orphan kids living with us. Utica, Satica, Cheeto, Tado.
That's 4.
And Cheeto, Tado.
Okay.
I can't remember the fifth name.
All right.
But anyway, they were all orphans, and they just decided to take a liking to us and stayed there with us. But they eventually came around and rounded up all the civilians and moved them into a certain area, but when we were there, some Japanese had come in, and I was on a delivery on a message, and some Japs come in and dropped a bunch of knee mortars. I think they were shooting at a little Piper airstrip that was right there, but the whole works come over right into our area. My lieutenant got shrapnel. He had like 100 holes in his tent, and he was hit a number of times. Practically everybody that was there got small pieces because knee mortars, that's what they were. They were in to make casualties, not to necessarily kill, but to make casualties so that they would have somebody to shoot at when somebody come to help them, you know. But practically everybody in the company got hit, and I was gone.
Right. So the Japanese would just had either people hiding somewhere, or they brought them in by sea.
These have been bypassed, evidently.
Yeah.
They've been bypassed, and for some reason they decided to come down and dump some knee mortars on that particular area. And then shortly after that, while the war ended.
All right. Now this tape is about to end, so we're going to pause here. Okay, now we've taken your story, now kind of the end of World War II. Before that was announced, were you getting ready to go to Japan?
Yes. Yeah, that was we were scheduled to go into Japan, and that was what we were figuring on doing up until the time that they dropped the bombs.
Okay. Now, were you doing more training and drills to?
No, at that time we were just reorganizing, and of course it was not long after that ended that they sent us to China.
Right.
We went up there to primarily repatriate the Japanese who had been in there since 1937.
Right.
And never known defeat, and that was quite an experience.
Where did you go in China?
Tientsin, which was a big international port and had a history of troops from all over the world, really, that were stationed in there. Marines were in there for years, but French troops, German, all kinds of troops have been in there, and Italian. There was a whole lot of Italians, White Russians, a little bit of everybody.
Right.
But when we got up there, why, it was, there was armies of Japanese troops that had never known defeat. And they were all still there, armed and so forth. We never had any trouble with them. Our unit was to get them back to Japan with nothing. They weren't allowed to take hardly anything with them. And so they were selling stuff, they were throwing stuff away, they were, doing about everything they could. But we had no problems with them, but we did have some problems with some of the Chinese. Because if you, at that time when we went up there, they disbanded our unit because we were an assault unit, which they had no use for it anymore. And they assigned me to the 1st Signal Company, and they took me in this building, and they said, "This is a teletype, you are a teletype operator." I didn't even know what a teletype was. but my job there was to sit there and type 4-letter code groups of messages the whole time I was on duty.
All right.
When I was not on duty, I was almost free to go most any place. But that's not a good idea in China. And supposedly we were supposed to be on a certain leave, and, you know, you get so much liberty so often and so forth, but they made the mistake of allowing people to sign out to go to what they called the division gym or the division theater. Well, that didn't mean anything. You'd sign out and go over wherever you wanted to go. But it was a mess. It was a mess. We had, you know, they took all of us guys up there that had been down in the Pacific, you know, a couple, 3 years even, and turned them loose, and you could buy anything for nothing. I was a PFC, and I had all the money in the world to go out and eat. There was a lot of, like the Italian soldiers who were there when the Japanese come in, and they just sold all their weapons off and everything, and disbanded and started Italian restaurants. You know, and all of these, the White Russians, I got to know a White Russian young man who was in the money market business, because China had 2 types of money. One type, the exchange rate was like 31,000 to 1. The new Chinese money that they were printing was like maybe 1,000 to 1. And so people were working this money market by, and that was what this young Russian, I can't even remember his name now, but I got acquainted with him, and we went to restaurants a couple of times together, and some Chinaman would come running in and hand him an envelope, and he'd open it and look at it, and he said, "Look, tell him someplace else to go, you know, to exchange this." We had people in the 1st Marine Air Wing who were flying from one place to another, and they got in on this act of money changing. And they'd buy it cheap here, sell it high over here, vice versa, you know. And it became quite a thing over there. But I never got into that. Other than I'd search around and see where I could find the best exchange, you know. But theoretically, we weren't supposed to be spending American money there anyway.
Right.
They give us those fake pieces of money.
Okay. And how dangerous was it there?
If you were by yourself, it was very dangerous. If you were 2 or 3 together, they didn't usually hassle you. But it was not safe to go any place in China by yourself. And it took a while to learn that, because there were a lot of things going on. It was pretty rough.
Yeah. Now, was there prostitution going on?
Oh, the prostitution was 90% of their money. It was just unreal, just absolutely unreal. And guys go out and mess with that stuff and just catch all kinds of diseases. I mean, terrible. But the biggest thing was go out and get drunk, party it up, you know. And if the Navy was in town, why, we'd fight with the Navy. If there happened to be any Army troops around, we'd fight with the Army troops, fight over whose bar you were in, you know. It even got to the point where, you know, we'd start fighting. If there were none of those guys around, we'd fight between regiments or between companies. whoever was available and was, but it just got real bad. And when we first got there, they allowed us to carry weapons when we went out on liberty, when we had free time. But they finally tried to put a stop to that, so then everybody carried a K-bar down in their boot, and so you had your knife anyway. But it was a terrible thing. The bars were just rampant, and I started drinking and just, oh my, it didn't have any sense to me at all. But it was an education.
But
So,
how long
was there? I was in China about 6 months.
Okay, it's a long time. All right. So now from there, do you get to go back home now, or what happens?
Well, eventually I did. I had enough points to go home, but they didn't have ships to take us home because they were too busy hauling Chinese from one point in China to another point in China. They were hauling Chinese troops up to the north, where the communist troops were now beginning to. They had a train that run between Peking and Tianjin, and they'd sit up in the hills and shoot at the train as it went by. And eventually, after some of us left, they even attacked one of our units that was down on by themselves. And it got pretty serious then. But up until then, there was a lot of, the communists are coming to town tonight, so we got 100% alert. And, nobody show up. So it got to be kind of a hocus pocus, but eventually, after I'd left, then it did get pretty serious,
Right.
and they finally pulled everybody out of there.
Okay. Now, how did they get you back home?
On a ship.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just a troop transport, or
Yeah, just a regular troop ship.
okay.
Yeah.
All right. And was it a quiet voyage back, or did you have bad weather?
No, didn't have, then, we had bad weather when we left Okinawa. We had run into a lot of bad weather because there was a big storm came
Typhoon,
up,
yeah.
and our ship, I was on a work detail, and the ship was basically empty other than the work detail that had gone on early, and we went out to sea to ride it out, but oh my. They couldn't cook anything. They couldn't, they'd feed us sandwiches maybe, but that was about all we could get to eat. And you would have to stand there and hold on to something. You weren't allowed to go on the quarter deck or any place above decks at all. But it was, we rode out a big hurricane. That was my first experience with a real storm.
Right. Okay. Now, when you get back to the States, where do you land?
I went to San Diego, back to San Diego,
Okay.
and we eventually, it didn't take us too long, really. They put us out.
Okay. So you got your discharge in San Diego?
Got my discharge.
Right. Now, did they have you ask you to join the reserves, or?
Yep.
Okay.
And I did.
Okay. And why did you do that?
Because I made corporal. World War II, and it took me that long to make corporal. And one of the things they said was, well, at least you'll keep your rank. And at that time, a corporal in the Marine Corps did do work tails. He might be in charge of a work detail, but basically he wouldn't have to do the work that PFCs and privates did, So I thought, well, maybe that's a good idea. So I signed up.
All right. But in the meantime, you're out of the Marines. Where did you go then after you got out?
I came here to Wichita and started to get an education because I had quit high school I never even, just barely started the 10th grade.
Mm-hmm.
But I took my GED test
Okay.
and got a high school equivalency and started going to college to get an education because I began to realize I needed one.
Mm-hmm.
And
So what college did you go to?
well, I started at Wichita State,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't last very long out there because I had one class out there that had 220 some people in it, and there was some guy sitting next to me playing a radio. And I thought, man, this is not for me. So I went to Friends University,
Okay.
and I loved it out there because the biggest class I ever had at Friends was 25 people.
Mm-hmm.
When I took, I was majoring in music, and when I took composition, I was the only one who signed up for the class, so I took composition by conference.
Mm-hmm.
And just so happens that the man teaching composition was another ex-Marine, and we hit it off real well, and I had him for an instructor in some other classes, and I just did great with him.
Okay. And what were you planning on doing with that?
I was planning on teaching music theory in a small Christian college.
Okay. All right. Now, did you graduate from Friends?
Yes, I graduated from Friends, and I thought I was going to go to Wichita State and get my master's degree.
Mm-hmm.
And I went out to the VA, and I said, I'd like to sign up to get some more education. Well, you've had all you can have. Well, by then I was married and had one daughter, and that just wasn't going to work too well. That's when I decided that I wasn't going to be what I thought I would.
Okay. So now, what year was this now when you graduated from college?
53, I think.
So that's after Korea.
No, that's
Because Korea
yeah,
starts
yeah. That's after Korea.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm
So-
sorry. No,
okay,
because
so-
I had gone to 3 years of college before Korea started,
Okay.
and that's when I was called back. 1 week after Korea broke out,
Right.
our reserve Marine Corps was called up, and 2 weeks later we were in California and formed up the 7th Regiment of the 1st Division.
Okay. Now, when you get there and join the 7th Regiment, what proportion of the people do you think were World War II vets?
Probably 50%,
Okay.
pretty good percentage of
All
them.
right. And how long do you think you stayed in California then?
Not very long. We formed up the 7th Regiment, loaded it up on the ship, and 3 weeks later we made the landing at Incheon.
All right. Now, what do you remember about that?
I remember going in a Amtrak again, and sailing past a big ship that was firing 16-inch guns over our heads, and come in and made the landing. And fortunately, we didn't run into anything real drastic
Mm-hmm.
for quite a little while. And matter of fact, that was a good move. That was MacArthur's
Mm-hmm.
thing.
It's about the last smart thing he did, yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Just the last smart thing he did. But he, we went in and we got over about halfway through Korea, the South Korea.
Yeah.
And then they decided that they'd just pull us out, and we come back around. They pulled us back out, and we got on board ship, went clear around the south end of Korea, went up into North Korea, made a landing up at Wonsan because MacArthur says, just go right on up and take North Korea.
Right.
And we made a very peaceful landing there after a certain length of time. It took some ships a long time to clean out the mines that had been placed out in there, but we finally got there. But then we began running into some opposition, and some of it was serious, some of it was just kind of nitpicky stuff, you know.
Now, was your opposition at this point North Korean, or were you getting Chinese showing up?
No, we didn't get the Chinese until we got clear. We got to within 16 miles of the Yellow River, is where we had two regiments up there. We had the 7th Regiment and the 5th Regiment of the 1st Division. And the 1st Regiment of the 1st Division was back here about 30 miles. And they had a perimeter set up there. But that's when the Chinese come in.
Okay. Now, when you're going into Korea, because you go in, did you go through Seoul or close to Seoul?
Yeah, well, we went through Seoul, and it was, you know, it was just leveled.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And when you come around, you go to North Korea now. What was the country like?
Mountainous, and very calm for a while. Matter of fact, I can remember one of the first buildings we stayed in was had been a university of some type or another, because they had a great big pump organ in there, and I played at the piano, and I finally found somebody to come over and pump their organ for a while for me so I could play, but nobody wanted that job full time. But we, at that time, we weren't, you know, weren't getting much things. As far as us going into North Korea, we had the North Koreans beat at the 37th parallel. 39th parallel.
Well, 38th is the official one, but they had really worn themselves out in the earlier fighting, and now they were
and
collapsing.
we had cut off a whole lot of them because they took our regiment and attached us to the 1st Cavalry Army Division for about a month, and we were supposed to be out rounding up these North Korean troops that had been bypassed. Well, we didn't find any to speak of, you know, because all they did was just change clothes. So we were assigned to 1st Cavalry for about 30 days, and that's the best we ever ate in Korea.
So Army food was better than Marine food.
That was a whole different thing.
All right.
But then they finally pulled us back, and then we began our trek up north.
All right. Now,
The further north we went, the more opposition that we received.
Now, was it starting to get cold too? Was the weather getting colder now?
Oh yes, very cold, and a lot of wind and a lot of snow, and it was miserable. But our regiment got to within about 16 miles of the Yalu.
Okay.
And they hit our 2 regiments with 6 full Chinese divisions. All they had to do was cross the bridge, and they were on us. So they weren't even really cold yet.
Yeah. Well, a lot of them had already been positioned inside North Korea waiting for you.
Yeah, they were just waiting.
So you're in the area around the Chosin Reservoir then?
Yep, that's right.
All right.
That's where
Now,
we were.
when that fighting starts, what happens to you?
Well, the first thing that happened to me while we pulled, they hauled me and a bunch of other guys down, and we stood in a creek bank, frozen creek bank for, I don't know, probably 24 hours because they thought the Chinese were coming through there. Well, they never showed up there. But then we held up there. They told us to hold up there for 2 days. And we did, which allowed the Army over on the other coast to start pulling back. But then when we started pulling back, then we had a horse of a different color. And, the first thing that happened then, we were at Udamne. That's as far as we got. But the captain called me and he said, if you can't carry it and run, burn it. I thought, oh, well, that don't sound too good. But he knew what was coming. And we had a single road that was the only way out. And they had already infiltrated down along and had troops set up all along there, just waiting for us to try and get out of there. And the two regiments played leapfrog with each other coming out of there. And you would, and of course it was, oh my, it was cold. It was like 30 below at night.
Now, were you just a rifleman? Were you a communications guy? What was your job?
At that time, I was in communications for 7th Regiment. But when this started, you were troops.
Right.
There was no particular job, you know. Matter of fact, a lot of the stuff we destroyed was stuff that was used for that kind of stuff, for communications and so on. Basically, we were all troops.
Right.
And we started leapfrogging out of there. And the 1st Regiment had a perimeter set up at Hagaroo, and that was where we wanted to get to first to coordinate and get back with them. And there was a British battalion that was up there with us, with them. But they had come from down south, and they had taken terrible casualties getting up to that perimeter. But we had to go on this main road, was the only way out. And vehicles were freezing up. If you didn't keep them running constantly, they would freeze up and they were done. They would shove them off the cliffs. But we started down that road, and everybody walked except wounded. And for a long while, we were trying to load up dead too, as we went along to pick up whatever dead we could and put them into 6x trucks. But when we got to Hagaroo, by the time we got there, we had so many more casualties that we had to unload all those trucks we'd filled with dead. And they were buried there. I think there was like, I can't remember the number that we buried, but I can remember they just bulldozed a big hole out and covered them up.
Right. Now, as you were making that move down to Hagaroo, how close do you think you got to the Chinese?
About as close as I am to you.
Okay. So.
Because every time we would come around a bend, they were situated up here, and we would receive fire. And at one time, they ran through us, turned around and run back through us on the road. And at that time, our whole S2 unit got wiped out. My captain got machine gunned in both legs. And I can remember seeing, I was hiding behind a tank once, and I would look around, and when the tank would fire his machine gun, this was at night, I could see this Chinaman laying out there. He was dead. But every time they would fire, there'd be enough light you could see him. I imagine that Chinaman got shot 150 times because he was one of the targets you could see in the dark. But eventually, if they would stop shooting long enough, we'd get on the road and literally just run down that road as fast as we could run. And here again, nobody riding except wounded.
Right.
And we pulled into the perimeter at Hagaroo, and we stayed there. I can't remember now how many days we stayed there, but as we came in, we had to run by a tank that was burning, and this lieutenant was trying to time it with the snipers that were up here shooting and telling us when to run, you know. Well, I've come my turn to run around that tank, and I headed around that tank, and I slipped on the ice, and my helmet went one way, and my rifle went another way. And I got my rifle back. I just left the helmet there, because there were helmets laying every place. And we finally got within, and then they said, when we got around where they couldn't shoot at us anymore, why, then they said, well, there's some warming tents set up down there. Go down there and find a place where you can get in and get sleep, because we hadn't slept at all. And I went out, found a place, not on a cot or anything, but on the ground, but close to an oil burning stove, and went sound asleep. I just passed out.
How long had it taken you to get from your original position down there?
Well, to that point, it was about 4 days.
Okay.
Yeah, it
All
was
right.
just run and stop, run and hide, run and stop.
And now that you've gotten this far, you still have to get back down to the coast.
Yeah,
So if you
still
have,
got to get all the way down, and that's where we run into a whole lot more fire when we first began to move out of that area. Then I can remember seeing Chinamen coming down off of the hill, just like a lot of them had white suits on, and it just looked like sheets of them coming down. And if it was clear enough, we could get some air power in. That air power is the only thing that saved us up there, because they would hit those, and you would see a black spot show up there, and then pretty soon it'd just fill in. There were so many of them coming, and but thanfully we got enough of that air power in when it wasn't snowing so bad. But when it was snowing bad, it was cold. It was miserable cold. But basically, we were just running down that road.
and how long did it take to get down?
10 days.
Okay.
We spent 10 days that way.
Now, was that worse than the first 4 days, or about the same? Which part of that evacuation was
The first 8 days were terrible,
okay?
because we got down so far, and then it relatively cleared out, and when we got to Hung Nam, they had a big perimeter around
Right.
Hung Nam,
Okay.
and we pulled into there, and they had ships ready to take us
Okay.
out.
All right, but I guess I was sort of asking too. I mean, you had the trip from the reservoir down to Hagaroo, and then you had Hagaroo down to the coast.
Yeah.
Were those two trips about the same in terms of how scary they were, or was one more dangerous than the other?
Well, just getting started was the hard part.
Okay.
Because we took, that's where the bulk of our casualties were.
Because I
There's
guess
still over 7,000 missing up there. Well, not all Marines, but we're on the Army side too. But they continually finding people. Matter of fact, when I went to Washington D.C. with the flight about 5 or 6 years ago, that next morning they were burying a young Marine whose body they had just recently found in north Korea, and he was being buried up at Arlington, but he was being buried the day we left to come back. So
Right.
I would love to have gone to that service, but I was tickled to death to get to go the 2 days that I went up there.
Right. Okay. So now they've gotten you back now down to Hungnam. Now what happens?
They evacuated us out of Hagaru. They put us on a ship where they had, evidently it had been some kind of a pleasure ship of some kind.
Passenger ship, yeah.
Yeah, passenger ship. They had 2 galleys, they had hot water, they had everything going. And they were serving food 24 hours a day in those 2 galleys. They had hot water running, and those of us that didn't have any clean underwear, they were supplying us, the Navy was supplying us with some clean underwear. And they took us back down, we went clear back down to the capital of South Korea.
Seoul.
Seoul, yeah. And then we stayed there. That was about Christmas time, because our chaplain had found a little organ someplace, and he had a church service that night, and he wanted me to play his organ for him. I was surprised. It was just a little old pump organ, you know. But I don't know where he come up with it, but we had the Christmas. And then we were being refit, new troops coming in and so forth. And I went to the hospital. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks.
And why
were at Mason.
Okay. And why were you in the hospital?
Well, I had frostbite. I had an infected tooth. I had pleurisy. I was sick.
Yeah.
And I was in the hospital, I think 10 days.
Okay.
And then they decided that I was well enough to go. They said, well, go down to this casual company. I thought, well, I'll be in the casual company for a while and get the rest. I wasn't in that casual company 15 minutes. And I had gone down to one of these tents that had set up down there and started to sit down almost. They said, hey, Crow, we got transportation back to your unit. I couldn't believe it, you know. And they took me over there and they put me in the back of a C-20. What was that?
An airplane?
Twin engine.
Okay.
And they had a whole bunch of mail bags in there, and me, and a pilot and a co-pilot. And sure enough, within a very short time, I was back in our area. I went in to see the sergeant top, and I finally found him because there was a lot of strangers around there that I didn't even know. And when I walked in to see him, he said, where you been, you Goldberg, and so-and-so. But anyway, I was back.
At this point in the war, the Chinese are still pushing south. I mean, they pushed through Seoul.
Yep.
Okay, so did you have to move, or what happened?
Let's see. Well, then that's when they assigned us over to the 1st Cavalry Unit.
Okay.
And we were supposed to look for some of these Chinese that had been bypassed. And it didn't work out very well. So then they said, we went back to the line, and the line then was back at about the 48th parallel, 38th
38,
parallel.
yeah. Okay.
And then it was back and forth, back and forth, back and forth.
Okay. Is it becoming something closer to sort of trench warfare with
Oh,
stable
yeah,
lines?
well, not so much that as, you'd go up a ways and then you'd have to come back
Yeah,
a ways.
yeah.
And then
'Cause
you'd
the
go
Chinese-
up a
yeah.
ways and,
Yeah.
it was just a push and shove and, it was really pretty tough.
Okay.
But then it was, I can't, trying to remember.
So did you,
I
how
can't
long, do you think you
remember.
stayed into the middle of 51, or?
But we were right along the parallel.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
and-
eventually where the fighting
yeah,
kind of settles
yeah,
down.
It was just going back and forth and
Yeah.
back and forth and back and forth. And, but I was back with my, well, at that time they had me in charge of the message center.
Mhm.
And I would, one of the jobs I was doing was encoding messages and decoding messages. A little CSP 1500, about like this. You have to set all the pins, and every day was a different set of pins and so forth. And because I can remember one time the Korean Army on our left flank had pulled out and left us up against a river on our side, and they were trying to push us off over here, but I was in a foxhole between two tanks, and I had that message coder down there trying to type out a message. I don't know if I was encoding it or decoding it or what, but I mean, it was the tanks would fire and I would jump, and the machine guns would fire. You know, I thought this is ridiculous, you know. But they eventually got a pontoon bridge run across that river, and we were able to get out of there.
Mm-hmm.
But it just got to be a fiasco. It was just a back and forth and back and forth. Some of those roads I think I could have run in the dark.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually, a guy come around and said, "Your enlistment's run up. I got some papers here for you to re-enlist." And I said, "No, thank you. I'm not re-enlisting." He said, "Well," he says, if you're going back to the States, you can't re-enlist." I said, "I'm not going to re-enlist." I said, I'm going home. And they had come out with an All-Mar directive that said everybody with so much time in Korea, so much time in World War II, went home no matter what.
Yeah.
But you couldn't re-up.
Mm-hmm.
So I eventually got on a truck, and I worried that whole time I was in that truck because he was hauling me all the way from where we were up in Central Korea, clear down to the
Busan?
Seoul,
You go to Seoul? Or
in the
Busan?
dark at night.
Mhm.
And I thought, sure as the world, I'm going to get killed going out of here, you know. But they eventually got me down there, and they put me on a ship. We went over to Japan for one day, and lo and behold, they still had my sea bag over there, which we'd left there when we stopped at Japan on the way in. So I got my sea bag back, and then they sent us home on the ship.
All right.
And I took complete discharge then.
Okay. So you finally then get back home to Wichita. You get home to Kansas again. Now what do you went back to school to finish school?
Yeah.
Okay. And then when you graduated, the VA didn't want to give you any more money
Yep.
after those first 4 years. So you're not going to be the music professor.
Yep.
So what did you do instead?
Well, I got a job with a company that was selling aircraft parts.
Okay.
It happened that a gentleman I knew was a comptroller for him, and I was sheriff's office. I spent 4 years at the sheriff's office as a deputy sheriff, but mainly as a dispatcher. But having spent some time out on patrol.
Now, were you doing that while you were in school, or did you do that after?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
while I was in school.
All right.
Because I worked third shift there, or second shift there. Then I worked third shift at Always Sutton Company, and I went to school in the daytime, and I slept here and there.
I guess. So your family did not see you.
It was tough. It was tough because I had a wife and a child, and of course they suffered when I got called back to Korea. My wife didn't get any allotment for 4 months.
Wow.
So I had a good friend of mine at Arch Baum, the old OK Transfer Company in town. He was a good friend of mine, and he loaned my wife money and wouldn't take any of it back until I got home. And so she got by for those 4 months, but it was something else.
Yeah. All right. But now you wind up working for an aircraft parts company.
Yeah, I worked for a company for about 8 years, and then I went to work for another company for probably 6 or 7 years. And then I decided I was going to start my own company. So I paired up with a good friend of mine, and he had a company that he was doing plastic supplies, and he had been dabbling in aircraft parts some, and I said, well, we'll go see what we can do. And so we just eventually split it up, and he had one company and I had another company, and we did very well, and I enjoyed it, and that's what I retired from.
All right. Now, to think back to the time that you spent in the Marine Corps, how do you think that affected you? Did you change because of it or learn anything?
Well, I think I just got a little smarter. Began to realize, that there was something more important than fishing or hunting or, things like that I enjoyed so much, or like going downtown to play pool in the pool hall instead of going to school, and things like that. I began to realize there was other things that needed to be done. It was, I changed a long ways. War has a way of changing your mind on a lot of things. I felt so fortunate to get through as well as I did. And matter of fact, I never filed for compensation until about a year ago. The first time that I went up. I used to go out to the VA once in a while after World War II, and I just, it was such a hassle, just a complete hassle, and I said to heck with it, and I just give up on them. But then when my wife come down ill and I began to realize I'm going to be stuck with some pretty big care bills here for a while, I said, I'm going to go out there to the government and see if I can get some compensation for frozen feet and loss of hearing and whatever. So I went out and I was amazed this time. It just went just like this.
Well, good for them.
And first thing I knew, I was getting some compensation for both hearing and my feet. And up until then, all I'd ever heard was, you have too much money. You have too much money. And, so what?
All right. Well, you clearly have done well for yourself, and it makes for a very good story. So I'm going to close here. I'd like to thank you for taking the time for sharing it today.
I appreciate what you're doing, because I know that people need to know what some people gave up for, because we lost so many great people, just so many of them, and I just, and so much of it was mistakes. Mistakes that were made by leaders or thinkers or what have you. And it was a shame. But that's about it.
Yeah, well, soldiers have to do what they have to do.
Yeah.
You did your job. All right. Thank you.